Turning now to Ukraine, where everyday life in the frontline cities is a gamble. Civilians are regularly under fire from rocket and artillery shells. Every decision to leave shelter to get food or supplies could be your last. But there are people who are staying, and their reasons for taking that risk are complex. DW's Max Zander joined an evacuation team of Ukrainian police as they tried desperately to persuade people to leave.
Avdiivka is Ukraine, the sign reads. It seems very clear how people here feel, and yet in frontline towns like this, we find stories that are complicated. These men are trying to get people to leave. Gennady and Dmitro belong to a police evacuation unit nicknamed White Angels.
Залишатись крайне небезпечно. Це працює один магазин, де можна придбати і хліб. Сам поход до магазину або за водою, або за ліками, або в лікарню – це квест. Пройдеш, не пройдеш, виживеш, не виживеш. Можна попасти під обстріл і либо отримати поранення, либо загинути.
A colleague came with him this morning to say goodbye to his own mother. 4 days ago, she was killed by an explosion while on her way to work at the city's coke plant. This was home to more than 32,000 people before the war. Bombs and shells still fall in this ruined place. Russian forces are making gains. Still, about 2,000 people choose to remain. A resilience point, there's tea, electricity, and company.
Здесь моя родина. Я здесь родилась. Я здесь всю жизнь прожила. Здесь мои родители в земле лежат. Я не хочу бросать свой дом. Труд 2 поколений просто уничтожен. Мне очень жаль. Это сильнее меня. Я не могу уехать.
Gennady and Dmitro have been asked to visit one particular couple. The man's daughter asked the policemen to get them out. They have moved underground.
Ваша донька надіслала нам відеозапис. Просила, щоб ви переглянули його. Вам надіслала. Я тобі теж.
Папа, привет. Так продолжаться больше не может. Я не могу позволить, чтобы мой родной и единственный отец жил в таких условиях. Богом молю. Очень надеюсь, ожидаю тебя. Целую и обнимаю. Пока.
Ваша дочка, Николаевич, готовы выехать?
Нет.
Чего? Ну, готовы ж вас приютить. Дочка ж примет вас.
Не готов.
Почему? А когда будете готовы, скажите?
Когда все закончится.
Fear is what's keeping them.
От судьбы не уйдешь. Если тебе суждено от этого, ты погибнешь. Если нет. Я, например, боюсь дороги. Мне все кажется, что в дороге со мной что-то случится.
Police officers can't force people to leave. And Russian propaganda has left some scared of the Ukrainian authorities.
Мовляємо, даємо час на роздум'я людям. Ми їх вивозимо на броньовані автомобілі до Покровська, де їх приймуть волонтери, оформлять пенсію, оформлять переселенські. Все буде у них добре.
We have to stop filming. And seek shelter. As soon as it's safe, we go to where the bomb hit. So while we were just finishing up with that lady in the basement, just a few hundred meters away, we heard a really big bang. And this is the aftermath, as you can see. Rocket impacted here just a few minutes ago, literally, and took this whole place apart. That's everyday life here in Avdiivka. This was the town's market. This woman came to sell household goods. She isn't hurt, but you can see she's in shock. Avdiivka was a frontline city long before the Russian full-scale invasion. Russian-backed rebels were in control for a brief period in 2014 before the Ukrainians took it back. Now the Russians seem to be advancing again. Those who stay know the fighting will continue. An hour's drive away, in Chasiv Yar, we're close to Bakhmut. Here it's thought less than 10% of people have stayed.
Заходите, пожалуйста.
Here we meet Oleg. He's 74 years old and used to be an economist. Now he grows onions behind broken windows.
Это мой брат картины рисовал, натурально, это рукой рисовал. Он в Москве учился в художественном институте. Вот это я тут живу, это спаленка моя, я тут жил. Уютно все, свет был, отопление было. Сейчас ничего этого нету, конечно. 8 февраля ракета прилетела во двор.
Oleg relies on donations for the basics. Despite the conditions, either out of poverty or pride, he's staying here.
Не хочется никуда ехать. Я тут родился, долго прожил. Тут мои родители были. Я не хочу от их могил ехать. Лучше умру здесь буду, захоронят. Где-то, не бойтесь, это от нас стреляют.
We ask him to show us a memory, something from before the war. He pulls out this, a Soviet military ID. 43 years old, but kept close to hand.
Мне и тех дураков, и этих жалко. Мне их... Это один народ. Это одни и те же люди, понимаете? Они все были в Советском Союзе, все служили в советской армии когда-то. А сейчас разделились мнения. Это начальство где-то неправильно сделало, что столкнули один народ. Не надо было так делать, понимаете? Это надо было договариваться.
That's a common opinion in towns like these, even though negotiating with Russia could leave them under Moscow's rule. There's a sense that some are not just nostalgic about the Soviet Union, but waiting for Russians to arrive. Back in Avdiivka, we asked police officer Hennady about this.
На жаль, є такі випадки, які чекають так званого руського миру. Можливо, і зливають інформацію розташунки Збройних сил України. Є такі випадки, коли затримували Службу безпеки України таких людей. Є такі, у яких місцевих мешканців воюють на той стороні родичі.
The officers of the White Angels can offer a way out of town for those who want to take it.
Well, I'm now joined in the studio by my colleague Max Zander, who has filed that report you just saw and has just returned from eastern Ukraine. Max, it's good to be talking to you. Really some incredible reporting over there under very difficult conditions, I have to say. We're seeing these people in your report, people who are choosing to stay in frontline towns. We can see the conditions. You spend a lot of time talking to people. What's your overall sense about who these people are and why they're deciding to stay?
Right, so just to give you a little bit of context, Christine, so these two towns that were featured in the report, that's Avdiivka and Chasiv Yar. They, prior to the war, they had a population of roughly 32,000 and 15,000. Right. And this population went down to 2,000 and roughly 1,000. So the majority of people will have left. And the people we met in these towns were largely, each and every case, each and every story is different, but you see a lot of old people, pensioners. There are people with disabilities. A lot of these people don't have any financial means, as in they're quite poor. So lots of these people cannot leave by themselves on their own, or they have reasons not to leave and they do not want to leave.
Right. We saw the conditions that they're living in, right? And now you're describing to us that these are elderly people, many of them with disabilities. Just how are they getting by? What is the sort of motivation?
Right. So, this is the question we try to ask everybody there. And what we would get a lot of the time, the first answer would be, I lived here all my life. I was born here. I had my family here. My parents are buried in my garden, and if I die, I want to be buried right next to them. People just simply cannot imagine, probably couldn't even imagine before the war, moving somewhere else, and especially now with all with the situation going on, with impacts, with bombs going off all over the place. They even feel probably this place is still safer, their house that they've been living in all their life than other places. Lots of people do not have the money. Some people told us they would leave, but they could not afford to start a new life somewhere else. And then also what you would hear sometimes is people say they're being treated poorly in Western Ukraine, that people from Eastern Ukraine or people, Russian speakers, perhaps are being taken advantage of or being treated poorly. This is largely due to Russian propaganda, Russian misinformation. But overall, we also have to think about the trauma that all these people are enduring. You spend the time we spent in these towns, there was probably not even 2 minutes or a minute where we did not hear an impact here or there. And these people have seen other people die on the street. So everybody is traumatized, and this adds to the situation and to your rational thinking, obviously.
Yeah. Are critical goods, humanitarian goods, getting to these people?
Yeah, so there is a military administration operating in these cities. There are authorities like these police officers operating in these cities. A lot depends on volunteers, though, on Ukrainian volunteers and on foreign volunteers that bring in donations, food donations. So they'll bring in pasta or lentils, as we saw in the report, drinking water, medical goods, sanitary products, that kind of stuff. And they do that at great risk. So they do it by road, and volunteers in the past have also been targeted, and volunteers also have been killed while trying to provide for these people who, decide to stay in these towns.
Well, Max, again, thank you for your incredible reporting in the story, helping us to understand the complexities, really, of the people who are on the front lines of this war that is. Max Zander, DW correspondent.
Let's bring in Roman Ossadchuk, who has been monitoring the information war in Ukraine since it began for the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab. He joins us from Kyiv. Roman, welcome to DW News. We have just watched a report about people staying in settlements under fire from Russian forces, and some of them still support Russia. Why is that?
Well, that's a complex question, right? And it's not the question of the Russian propaganda that just started in a prior, at the moment of the invasion. It's a long job. They promoted their narratives and stories that people should support Russia even before 2014, when they started the war in eastern Ukraine and annexed Crimea. So I think it's really complicated thing that really complex, and there is no easy answer to that. And secondly, people are not willing to leave their homes. They are too attached to the ground when they grew up and spent their whole life in. I've seen it in my parents, in people that I know. Even in the face of imminent danger, they are not willing to leave.
I mean, this all has to do, of course, with media consumption as well. And how did the first Russian aggression in 2014 affect the media landscape in Ukraine and the perception of Russia?
Sure. So it started damaging the perception of Russia, like the positive image of Russia. Prior to 2014, the presence of Russian media in Ukrainian media landscape was extreme. Since 2014, it started diminishing, but still, when you go to the trends of YouTube, for instance, or any other platforms, you could see that people were still consuming those media and messages. But since the invasion of 2022, a lot of people started stopping their consumption, right? They stopped their consumption of Russian narratives and media whatsoever. I mean, still some of them are still doing that, but not so many people as before. So Russia started losing their grip since 2014 slowly, and after the invasion of 2022, they lost a lot.
Now, despite all that, the old Soviet myth of the one nation seems to have survived in Russia, at least, and also in some parts of Ukraine. How is that?
Yeah, I mean, that is correct. But as you said correctly, it is a myth, right? If you look at the losses of Russian army, it's mostly people from the far regions, farthest from Russia, farthest from Moscow, right? So it's not people from the Moscow. There is some even separation and divisions within Russia. And the same was true in Soviet Union. There were some primary people, right? So the Moscovites and the people who were living nearby, and all other people and all other nations that were subjugated by the primary Russian so-called people. So it was imposed Russification, so that all of the people from other nations need to actually deny their heritage and become the Russians. But again, it is a myth as we know it, and it's one of the reasons why the Soviet Union collapsed in the end.
Roman Osachuk there joining us from Kyiv. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us.